Hey, third grade friends. This is Mrs. Miller. Today I'm going to read to you Lesson 7 about John Cabot. Now remember, if you need to pause the video at any time to take notes or you need to rewind to listen to something again, you can do that. Just make sure that you hit pause, go back, and re-listen again. All right, here we go. Here's some materials you're going to need for today. A pencil or something to write with, and our graphic organizer for our lesson, which you can find in your work packet that came from school or online in your Google Classroom. Let's review some things we already know. In Lesson 6, we learned about Spanish missions. So, what is a Spanish mission? What did missionaries want to accomplish? And in what parts of the United States were Spanish missions located? Let's start with what is a Spanish mission. A Spanish mission was a place that involved kind of a church-like building, like this one here, and the land around it, a lot of times farms and plantations, where missionaries could live and native people could live in the pursuit of Christianity. So what was it that the missionaries wanted to accomplish? Well, the missionaries sought to bring the Native Americans' way of life to an end, in a sense, because they wanted them to convert to Christianity. So they were asking them to give up their traditions, their language, their own belief system, in order to become more like the Spanish missionaries and conquistadors. Some missionaries did this peacefully, and some did not. And in what parts of the United States were the Spanish missions located? Well, if you remember, we were talking about areas down near Texas and Oklahoma and New Mexico, all down near that southern border. Okay, here's some things you're going to need to know about John Cabot for today's lesson. First of all, like Columbus, Cabot was also searching for a shorter route to Asia. Second of all, Cabot thought he could use a shorter route than Columbus. He thought he knew a shorter way to go. Cabot used his knowledge of latitude and longitude lines around the Earth to find a shorter route. So let's look at our picture here for latitude and longitude. Our latitude lines are these lines here. They run east to west across our globe. They go in circles all the way around. Our most well-known latitude line is this one here, the equator. Longitude lines are these. They run from north to south all the way around our globe this direction. Cabot knew about these lines, and he thought that he could find a shorter route to East Asia based on his knowledge of these lines. Here's our purpose for listening today. We're going to listen carefully to see how Cabot's knowledge of latitude and longitude lines helped him navigate across the Atlantic Ocean. In addition to that, you're also going to listen for more similarities and differences between Cabot and Columbus, and this will help you with your questions at the end. Earlier you learned about Christopher Columbus, an Italian explorer who sailed to represent Spain's interests. Today you will learn about John Cabot, another Italian explorer who sailed to represent England's interests. We know very little about the early years of Cabot's life. Historians believe that he was born in Genoa, Italy, the same birthplace of Christopher Columbus. He was also born about the same time as Columbus. In his early years, John Cabot was known by his Italian name, Giovanni Caboto. He lived for many years in the Italian city of Venice, where he worked as a merchant and a sailor. His work in Venice led him to travel along the coasts of countries in the eastern Mediterranean Sea, where he further developed his navigational skills. As a merchant, he began to think that he could obtain spices more quickly and cheaply by finding a westward water route that would take him to the east. In 1493, Cabot and many Europeans learned that Christopher Columbus had an idea very similar to Cabot's, finding a water route to Asia by traveling west. After several years in Venice, Cabot relocated to Bristol, England in 1495. Shortly thereafter, Cabot took steps to embark on a voyage of his own, but one that was slightly different from Columbus's. Let's turn to our graphic organizer for a minute. So here we're looking for similarities and differences between Christopher Columbus and John Cabot. Let's start with the sponsors. So we just read that Christopher Columbus sailed to represent Spain's interests, and John Cabot sailed to represent England's interests. So for Columbus, right here where it says sponsors, we're going to put Spain, capital S because it's a common noun, proper noun, Pain. And for Cabot, we're going to put England. Now, we don't know the route that Cabot took yet. We do know Columbus's route, but we'll fill that in when we figure out Cabot's. But let's go ahead and put for motivating factors for Columbus. Do we remember what he was searching for? He wanted a shorter route to the East Indies. Do you remember why? Right, gold and spices. So let's put shorter route to East Indies as a motivating factor. And we'll also add gold, spices, land. And we also know that Columbus wanted to kind of make a name for himself or become more famous. So let's also put get famous. Okay, for John Cabot, his motivating factors were similar. He also wanted to find a shorter route to the East Indies. And the reason was the same as Columbus's. He wanted to obtain those spices more quickly and cheaply. So we're still going to say spices, at least here. Didn't talk about gold yet. And we'll add more quickly and cheaply. Cabot had a simple idea. He knew the Earth was spherical, and he knew that one of the properties of a sphere is that the distance around it is greatest in the middle, or at its circumference, and less at the top or bottom. If you apply this basic geometry to the Earth, it means that the circumference of the Earth is greatest at the equator and is significantly less north or south of the equator. So think about a basketball. The circumference of a basketball, or the distance around it if you measure in the very middle, is 30 inches. The distance around that same ball, if you measure at a point closer to the top, is only 15 inches. So Cabot thought Columbus had made a strategic mistake in his attempts to sail to the East Indies. Columbus had sailed in the middle latitudes, close to the equator, where the distances would be longest. Cabot thought he could get to the East Indies faster by sailing at a more northerly latitude, where the distances would be shorter. He proposed heading north, hoping to find a northwest passage to Asia and the East Indies. Cabot tried to find sponsors and investors to support his voyage to find the Northwest Passage. In 1496, Henry VII, the King of England, decided to sponsor Cabot. Merchants in Bristol helped support the voyage as well, and Henry VII gave Cabot permission to explore and claim unknown lands for England. Cabot was also encouraged to bring any merchandise he acquired back to Bristol, England. Cabot was told he would enjoy a great share of the trade profits if the voyage was successful. If we go back to our notes now, we now know the routes that Columbus took and the route that Cabot was going to take. So we know that Columbus kind of sailed more around the middle of the Earth. And we know that the middle of the Earth is a little bit longer around, just like the length of a basketball is wider at the center. So for our route for Columbus, we're going to say he sailed the middle latitudes. Those are our lines that go around the middle, which Cabot thought would be a longer route and would take longer to get to where he was trying to go. It was closer to the equator as well. So let's put middle latitudes closer to equator. And Cabot thought if he sailed more northern or up towards the top of the globe, up towards the top of that basketball, it's going to be less distance all the way around. So Cabot wants to sail more northerly latitudes. So let's say northern latitudes. Where he's hoping that the distance is going to be a lot shorter. So northern latitudes close to the top. Okay, we also know another motivating factor for Cabot. So the King of England, Henry VII, has decided to sponsor him. We already knew that part. But we now know that Henry VII gave Cabot permission to explore and claim unknown lands for England. So now we could add land, or claiming new land, as one of his motivating factors. And we also heard that he was encouraged to bring any merchandise that he acquired back to Bristol, England, and he was told he would enjoy a great share of the trade profits if the voyage was successful. Remember, profits is that word that means anything you gain on top of what you already sell. So if you buy something for $1, you turn around and sell it for $5, your profit is $4. That's what you've gained. So we're going to say here for Cabot, another motivating factor was that he would get a large share of trade profits. Anything that he brings back that they're able to make some money on, he will get part of that, or a large part of that. Cabot attempted 3 voyages across the Atlantic. The first voyage attempt from Bristol, England, was not a success. Cabot and his men encountered terrible weather and ran short on supplies. In addition, Cabot had some disagreements with his crew regarding his route. With all the misfortunes that took place at the onset of the voyage, Cabot eventually decided to turn around and sail back to Bristol. Cabot's second voyage was more successful. Again, he had only one ship. It was a small ship called the Matthew, with a crew of just 18 men. Cabot and his men set sail from Bristol in May of 1497. They sailed past Ireland and across the Atlantic. On June 24th, they sighted land. Historians think Cabot made landfall somewhere in the area of southern Labrador, Newfoundland, or Cape Breton Island in present-day Canada, but the exact location is not known for certain. Cabot did not spend much time on land. It appears that he and his men got off the ship only once and did not wander inland more than a few hundred feet. They did not encounter any Native Americans, but did find signs of their settlement. Cabot claimed the land for England, collected some fresh water, and got back on board his ship. Cabot and his men spent some time exploring the coast of the area, now known as the Cabot Strait, a channel 60 miles wide between northern Cape Breton Island and southwestern Newfoundland. On their exploration of the coast, Cabot and his crew discovered some very good fishing grounds. As far as we know, Cabot was the first European to set foot in this part of North America, since the Vikings had around the year AD 1000. Cabot returned to England and went to visit King Henry VII, certain that he had explored the northeast coast of Asia. He reported to the king that he discovered wonderful land in a place with a good climate. He mentioned the superb fishing grounds of which England could make great use. This discovery made King Henry VII very happy, because at the time of Cabot's voyage, fish was a very expensive commodity. Seeing that his discoveries were welcomed, Cabot decided to return to the land he explored and sail until he reached another land in Asia, full of spices and riches, the land that today is called Japan. In February 1498, he received permission from King Henry VII to embark on another voyage. Very little is known of this third voyage. Historians don't know for sure, but this voyage probably involved around 200 men and maybe 5 ships. Unfortunately, when Cabot and his expedition set off, one of his ships became damaged, and the whole fleet had to stop in Ireland due to severe storms. Cabot was supposedly not heard from again, and some historians think he even died on that voyage. Other historians think that he returned from his voyage and lived in London for a short time, until approximately 1500. There is little evidence about this voyage, or the whereabouts of Cabot after the voyage, so historians can't really be sure of its outcome. John Cabot was like Christopher Columbus in many ways. Both men were born in Genoa, Italy. Both men convinced foreign kings to sponsor their explorations. Both men attempted to sail to the East Indies and ended up finding something else altogether. Cabot's explorations proved very important for England. His attempts to find a northwest passage to the East Indies failed, but finding and claiming land on the continent of North America instead were essential for England to later establish British colonies.